Tell us a little bit about what you saw and being able to relay that message to Cora when you watched Kimbrel pitch and kind of help out so he wasn't tipping his pitches.
So tipping pitches, we hear about it all the time.
People at home understand what tipping pitches is all about.
It's amazing.
And that's remarkable.
You know, Alex, I'm always really wrong-footed by whenever we need to start a podcast, whenever we need to do a cold open, but we have like a full podcast already recorded and we really got to get to it. Mm-hmm. When we have like 90 minutes of already recorded audio, but here we are in the cold open, which is designed to be like the most meandering, the least effective, the least proficient and professional part of this podcast. But here we are. So all that to say, I don't know what to say to you right now.
What?
And we have no new patrons. I have no questions. I have nothing. I'm just lost. I have 93 minutes of Michael Baumann.
How are you? How are you doing?
I'm good. I mean, we just recorded a good episode that everybody is about to hear. It's the weather's nice. You know, the northern lights are everywhere. Probably because of woke. You know, they couldn't just be northern lights anymore. They had to be southern lights and everywhere else.
Participation trophy. Everyone gets a northern light.
Exactly. Beautiful weekend of weather. Mother's Day.
Yeah.
I love Mother's Day. What a great holiday. Mothers. You heard it here first. Probably not.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm well, I'd say. I'm doing well. I'm excited. We do have Paul Skeens today. I'm excited to lock in for that.
He's finally pitching.
He is finally
pitching in Major League Baseball after
a month
17
of push
notifications that I got for his AAA starts. So it's like boy who cried Paul Skeens. You know, I didn't actually know that was today.
Mm-hmm.
Bad
yes,
marketing.
we got duped a couple times.
We got hoodwinked. We got bamboozled, but it's here. He's here. He was in the car with Livy Dunn as a selfie.
We've all seen it a million times. It's like every third tweet on my timeline right now.
I'm really proud of him for sticking to the mustache. You know, he's holding it down. We're all holding it down, going strong.
Yeah.
Me, Skeens, Glenn Powell. Actually, I don't think Glenn Powell has a mustache.
I think he lost it.
Bring it back, Glenn. If you're listening, I know that Glenn is a big listener of Tipping Pitches.
Yes.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
He's like, not normal baseball content that's not about baseball.
Right. I famously, I think he said on the press tour for Anyone But You, baseball for the many, not the few.
Yeah, he wore the shirt. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It looks a little better on him than us.
Yes.
But that's okay. We're working.
But so does most things, I would say.
Okay, today's episode, we're doing a fun exercise. We are drafting the most powerful people in baseball. I know that's very broad, but we are going to give more specific terms about what we actually mean. We're calling it the Power Brokers Draft. I tried to make Movers and Shakers Draft happen, but you guys downplayed it. You guys then wanted to talk about...
It just doesn't roll off the tongue. Movers and Shakers Draft.
You wanted to talk about Robert Moses. I get it. 3 white guys on a podcast talking about Robert Moses. Ooh, what a revolutionary concept. But what are you going to tell me next?
Which made you uncomfortable because you like Robert Moses.
Right,
You didn't like the vocal pushback.
What are you going to tell me next? Those same 3 guys are going to bring up Marks and Angles? Oh, no. I'm shocked.
Oh, wow.
I'm shocked.
We're nothing if not predictable here at Tipping Pitches. This segment that we're about to do goes all over the place, and it's entirely predictable, I would say.
Predictable in the way that Michael Baumann is never
exactly.
predictable.
Yes.
I'm excited for people to listen to it, and I'm excited for people to yell at us about how wrong we are. I'm also excited for Michael's first pick, which I don't think you see coming if you're listening to this podcast. Let's go over to that draft. But before we do, I am Bobby Wagner.
I'm Alex Basin.
And you are listening to Tipping Pitches. All right, Michael Baumann is here. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hello.
We allowed you on the Tipping Pitches podcast for something other than the state of labor in baseball. Do you think that the world is going to end because of that?
I'm excited, but I'm also, a little bit worried. I thought that you kept me in a box for 51 weeks out of the year, and you're letting me out, and I'm wondering what kind of emergency necessitated that.
You're like, I've never seen the summer sun. This is new.
Now that we're here on a public forum, I'd like to just point out, I didn't bully you for all those years. You were the one that was bullying me, doing a little bit of hazing, senior to freshman.
I've talked about us having, I hope I'm not overstepping my bounds, it's having a very fraternal relationship.
Yes, I think so. Yes.
I have a brother your age, and he is mean to me in the exact same ways that you're mean to me.
Just like identifying the micro ways in which you seem ancient compared to me, you mean?
Or not even ancient, but insecure. You've got a good, this is why I refer to you as a very swole child, because you have a teenager's affinity for targeting people's insecurities.
I appreciate that usually the first 5 minutes of your appearance on this podcast is kind of like a couples therapy session for the two of you. I feel like we get one layer deeper. Now we're going back to your familial upbringings, and I value that.
We don't talk as much as we used to. We used to,
True.
I used to have this guy in my ear every week, and
We used to work this out in the pre-show weekly.
yeah. So now we got to do this, when we talk every couple months. I do think the funniest part of that exchange was Shocker coming in and being like, "Was I as mean to you as Bobby was?" Which, first of all, is like typically like Shocker overeager / needy, but also like he doesn't have that dog in him. The way
okay.
You do.
So he didn't have the fastball. You were teeing off on him.
I said, like, what I meant was, like, you couldn't do this, and even if you could, you wouldn't, because you're too nice.
Well, I feel like one thing that's maybe underrated about this trio that we have here on the podcast is that you guys are both older brothers and I'm a younger brother. And I feel like that locks things into place for some
that
listeners.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in birth order.
Yeah.
I'm the oldest child. Both my parents are oldest children. My wife is an oldest child. Almost all of my best friends are oldest children. Like, I don't trust youngest children. And a lot is falling into place.
Are you a big believer in birth order, Alex? What's your subscription to that science?
I don't know that I have taken stock of the closest people around me, like Michael was just able to rattle off. I
mean, your co-host for life is an oldest sibling.
Although
I'm the youngest sibling.
Right. Which is weird, I think. I think it's interesting that we were drawn to each other in that regard.
Well, there is like an opposites attract element to it that sometimes works out.
Right.
Like I'm very, very introverted and very like not very feelings oriented. And that's made me a magnet for extroverts who have lots of feelings and think there's something wrong with me. Like Shocker, for instance. But
oh, what a beautiful way to start this podcast here. I think everybody could probably tell that we're recording this on a Saturday morning as opposed to our usual Sunday afternoon. We're all just sitting around in our feelings, starting the weekend off.
Mm-hmm.
We have time. We're not doing anything.
The reason that we invited you here today, Mike, is to do a really fun exercise, which I am colloquially calling the Power Brokers draft, alternatively the Movers and Shakers draft. You guys have any other alternative names that you'd like to call this?
Power Brokers, despite being derivative, I think really does capture the spirit of the exercise.
Derivative of what? The Power Broker?
Of the Power Broker, yeah.
Be honest with me. Have you read the Power Broker all the way through?
Of course I haven't read the fucking Power Broker.
Alex, have you read the Power Broker?
No, but I keep it on my shelf so I can it's aspirational.
As clout.
Right.
I was gonna.
It's one of the ones whose spine is poking out. So there's someone ever glimpses it. They're like, Power Broker. I'm like, yeah, it's there.
Yeah, I've carefully curated what's visible behind me. So you got Franz Fanon over my shoulder and a bunch of Star Wars books behind the bobbleheads. But yeah, no, this is like the kind of thing that, like, the Power Broker is something you read if you went to Mizzou, Syracuse, or Northwestern.
You mean like for the tryhards is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do own a copy of Infinite Jest that I got about 200 pages into and gave up. So, like, I will never try to read the Power Broker, but I did attempt and fail to summit Mount Infinite Jest.
Alex called me young Robert Moses on the podcast 3 weeks ago, and that really cut to the core. Yeah. I was like, man, maybe I need to do some introspection.
Well, we're going on like 4 straight episodes of you just advocating for car culture.
Well, let's be honest, though. I have an ally with me here, Michael Baumann,
That's
someone
true.
who understands the necessity of cars to the American identity. Am I right, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. And for better or for worse.
Right.
Exactly. We could be reasonable about it. And you are also an anti-electric car person.
Yes. I would love to not have to own a car, but it's not really feasible. Despite, by the way, like I live less than 2 miles from like easy walking distance as the crow flies from good public transit links that can get me into Philadelphia and from Philadelphia anywhere in the world. And it's inaccessible to walk. Like just because of the way the streets are laid out where I live. So like even if I want to take the train somewhere, I have to drive to the train despite living like a mile and change from a train station. If this were Belgium, like I'd just be on my fucking bike all over the place.
Yeah.
If my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bike, you know?
Yeah, I could
is
ride
not
my
Belgium.
grandmother to.
Okay, Power Brokers Draft. What this is we're going to go around in snake fashion, and we are going to draft people who we think wield the most power in the baseball world. And that could be up for interpretation. What is that power? Is it publicity? Is it financial power? Is it the ability to have the final say on things that dictate the future of this game? These people can come from any realm of the baseball world, but obviously we look at this stuff through a lens of Major League Baseball and its impact on American baseball and thus baseball all around the world. The only rules that we have set aside here are that we're each going to draft 4 people. There'll be 1 owner, 1 player, 1 executive, and then 1 wild card spot, so that we don't all just draft 4 owners, because we all know that who's really making the decisions in this game.
And for those of you listening at home, if it sounds like I'm unprepared, it's definitely because Bobby sprung those criteria on us 3 minutes before he hit the record button, and not because I started doing homework for this at 11:51 a.m. when we were supposed to start recording at noon.
I did spring those rules on you guys, but you were all, it was a unanimous thing. You're like, I do think this is better, and I think that will make this exercise
Because otherwise
better.
it would just be a list of owners. That's
Right,
exactly.
And we all know everything there is to know about all of the owners because of the hard work the 3 of us on this call have done over the years. I'm curious to see which owners do get selected, though. That will be, I think, telling about how we view the game. All right. Well, is there anything you'd like to talk about before we get into the draft, Mike, or do you want to just kick us off here? Because we're going to let you have the first pick. We're so generous. You come here on Saturday morning, we're going to allow you to have the first pick. But mostly I really just am scared to make the first overall pick because I feel like I might be wrong. So you're going to have to do that.
Yeah. I take part in a fair number of drafts on Effectively Wild, and I usually win.
How are those going
so,
for you? Yeah. Are those, you're crushing those?
Not so much this year. I've already been marked off for. So here's the thing. Last year at Effectively Wild, we did the prediction game where the listeners, the fans, voted on. They assigned points basically based on how likely they thought a prediction was going to be. And I almost won this game because I predicted that an animal would be killed during a baseball game, and it was so ridiculous that Ben and Meg and other Ben laughed at me, and then it happened. So I think the listeners think I have the gift of sight,
of clairvoyance. Yeah,
they gave me
you and Kyrie Irving.
Like I predicted. I mean, there are a few differences between Kyrie Irving. He's from North Jersey, for instance.
Right.
But
that's the primary one that I think of.
Yeah. But like I predicted nudity this year, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that's basically a coin flip." And so I'm just gonna get crushed this season, no matter what.
What constitutes as nudity? Is this the see-through pants? I assume does not.
I said the word gooch in my criteria.
All right. Wow.
I said there would be a uniform failure, such that I forget the list of anatomy. I think I said nipples, penis, balls, gooch, or butthole would be visible either through the uniform or
like
outside the uniform.
Did you sing it like head, shoulders, knees, and toes? Like
yeah, basically. But Meg and I, between the two of us, said gooch, taint, and perineum within the span of about 60 seconds on Effectively Wild. So
you guys need to be stopped. Like, frankly, you just have to be stopped. We need to put a committee together to come up with a plan to stop you two specifically. Okay, well, you are on the clock, so that was an incredible bit of vamping while you get a little bit more caffeine into your system over there. I tip my hat. To you, sir. But you do have to make a selection.
Yeah, we need to get this draft over before this giant Starbucks coffee makes me have to poop. So we are all on the clock in a manner of speaking. I'm going to pick, for my first pick, I'm going to take a wild card. I'm going to take former President Donald J. Trump. Wow. The most powerful person in baseball.
Okay.
This is why you're here. Like, this is what, that wasn't even on my long list.
It should have been, because everything that happens in this country, everything that has happened in this country politically and economically for the past 9 years has been either an action by, a response to, or in conversation with Donald Trump. And I think even beyond that, he's given proof that there's a level of power that you can amass at which Americans will just accept any level of criminality. And, you know, our country's business leaders, including but not limited to the people who run baseball, have taken that lesson to heart, I think. To say nothing of just the changing the Overton window in terms of I'll just say bigotry. You know, we're seeing like objections to Pride nights in a way that we wouldn't have had a few years ago. Everything that happens in this country is in some way conditioned by his presence. And, you know, I think that in addition to, you know, this man being the leader of a cult of personality, which I would say the overwhelming majority of owners and a plurality of players adhere. So, you know, this is going to be a very interesting election.
Alex, are you going to go second and take Biden?
Yes, I am. I'm going to zag.
So that this draft follows the order of the 2024 election?
What's fascinating is that I don't think he cares about baseball. Like, he does to the extent that it is an American pastime that he can participate in to sort of rizz up his like jingoism or whatever. But I think he could take or leave 162 games.
What is happening?
I
think that's true, but that doesn't stop him from exerting power.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's more fascinating that he has such power over a sport that he probably could take or leave.
Well, I'm not going to spoil anything. I don't know if any of you guys intend to take any senators or anything like that. But obviously, something that we've been chronicling for years on this podcast, and frankly, is one of our favorite things to make fun of, and made it onto our 2024 bingo card list, is the repealing of the antitrust exemption, which is a senator or a person in the House of Representatives throws around every once in a while when they want to have like a culture war, an easy bake oven culture war storyline that they can tweet about, do a tweet thread about, being like, oh, baseball is, you know, too gay, so we're going to repeal the antitrust exemption. And obviously, like, I feel like Trump could actually be the one to get that done if he was in the president's office and he just cared about it for longer than 2 hours or something like that. If MLB did something that pissed him off personally. And, you know, and then obviously there's like the long history of Trump tweeting about Justin Verlander or whatever. So it's notable, I think, although completely out of left field. I did not expect that from you.
The other reason I picked him is because power in terms of individuals tends to be very decentralized in this country. And particularly if you're looking at a national or at least an industry-wide scale. So this is one place where the locus of power is obvious. And he controls everything.
Okay. Donald J. Trump off the board, Alex.
Amazing.
Cross that name off.
Damn it.
Do you want to go second, or do you want to be on the turn?
Oh God, that's a good question. Because then I gotta go two back to back. I'll let you go. I'm magnanimous in that way.
I am going to take the control person of the Los Angeles Dodgers, Mark Walter, with my first overall pick. And I'm going to take him because I do think owners are the most powerful people in the game. I don't think that there is a Jerry Jones type left in Major League Baseball anymore. Like, I think if George Steinbrenner was still alive, I think he would be the obvious first overall pick for the owners. And I think that, you know, not to spoil any future picks, but I think that someone like Steve Cohen, who has come in with a lot of money, like throwing that around, has had a large impact on the discourse around baseball. But in terms of the actual levers of power that owners are in control of, as we progress more towards a Major League Baseball that is controlled by private equity, Mark Walter is in control of one of the largest private equity firms, which also just happens to own maybe the most marketable, fastest growing team in the sport as well. And so I think that if you wanted to make a change among all of the owners, of course, there are owners who have been longer standing, who have more relationships within the game, and maybe have a bigger fascination with exerting the power that they do have than Mark Walter does. But I think that he, as well as the rest of Guggenheim Baseball Management, him being the face of that, are warping the game more than any owner right now, whether that's the backloading the contracts, deferring the money that has been a big storyline in this past offseason, or whether it's just the nature of the fact that MLB clearly cares so much about the Dodgers and everything that they do. I'm going to take Mark Walter.
Yeah, chairs the Economic Reform Committee, kind of speaks for the big market teams, I think.
Right.
And it's not necessarily an intentional bending of the sport to his will, but when you wield that much power, when you have that much money to throw around, by necessity, any one action you take is going to have a ripple effect. And I think the Dodgers are a perfect example of that.
Baumann, what do you think about Mark Walter?
When I was writing about Steve Cohen a few years ago and was talking to our friend Meg Schuster, who was editing me at the time. And I was like, do you know who the best owner in baseball is? Like, do you know who the guy who owns the Dodgers is? And I don't remember if she knew or not. It was like, the reason that he's the best owner in baseball is you don't know who this guy is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a very interesting take on who the most powerful owner is. I think it represents one of the two right answers, but it is not the answer I would have given.
Interesting. I think who the most powerful owner is, and maybe we can have this conversation once everybody has selected their owner and why or why not you might prefer one or the other. But there's money, there's tenure and relationships, and then there's just like willpower, to factor in who gets the most done or who would win in an argument if we were debating an issue among the owners. Because I think that
this guy what he wants, so he'll shut up.
Right. I think there are some wedge issues between owners now that have cropped up in the last few years that maybe they were a little bit more in alignment on in the early to mid 2010s. And I think who would win those arguments is a fascinating conversation. But frankly, I think that if the owner of the Dodgers was like, no, we're doing this, I think he would win that. And we can talk more about that as we go through this list. But so that sends it over to you, Alex. You have to make two selections.
All right. Crazy to me that the name Rob Manfred hasn't been brought up yet, the commissioner of the game. And I'm not going to bring him up. I'm not going to pick him. Instead, I'm going to go with Executive Vice President of Baseball Operations, Morgan Sword, who is most likely the dark horse candidate for the next commissioner of baseball. Someone who I think the casual fan probably has no idea exists, despite how influential he's been, especially in the sort of the rule change element that we've seen over the last few years and kind of executing on the sort of one baseball vision that Rob Manfred has put forth. I think outside of labor, he has been incredibly influential in the partnerships that MLB has made, in the growth of sports betting in the game. I thought about just picking the sports books writ large, because I think you could make a case that they are wield a great deal of power in the sport. But short of that, I think having an ally in the commissioner's office who can do your bidding in that regard is very powerful. So I'm going to take Morgan Sword, the wonder kid and the heir to the throne, so to speak.
This is such a like an online like person who cares about MLB's leadership structure choice. And obviously he was on my list too. You and I have had several conversations about Morgan Sword, including like 3 days ago when we were talking about this exact exercise, and we were both like,
he's on my list of coolest names in baseball.
Alex, did you read his 40 under 40 profile in the Sports Business Journal?
No, I didn't.
They ask like a series of questions to everybody. And I'm just going to read you some of those questions and some of his answers to that. By the way, Morgan Sword, 39 years old. So he's going to be around for a while.
Was this the most recent, like 40 under 40?
Yeah, this was 2023.
Okay.
They ask you what's a cause that you support, and he chose Umps Care, which is the charity of the MLB Umpires Union. Fascinating choice by him. They asked...
Got to court the cop union if you're going to run for mayor of baseball.
They asked who the person in sports business that you'd most like to meet was, and he said Virginia basketball coach Tony Bennett.
Oh, God.
Feels like you could very easily meet that guy. It's not like the Pope. Like, Tony Bennett is just a guy. He's just around. Most pressing issue facing Morgan Sword's generation, according to Morgan Sword, is AI. And which side of the fence do you think Morgan Sword comes down on the old artificial intelligence? Do you think he's more of like it's a whole new ball game with AI guy, or do you think he's like AI is going to ruin culture?
Oh, he's taking the blue pill.
Yeah.
I think so too. And then the sports industry needs to do a better job of ... And he said, getting kids to play. So I wonder if he had anything to do with let the kids play. Seems maybe like he did.
Maybe, although I feel like he's probably talking about like 9-year-olds, right? Like, right. How do we open up the pipeline? He's probably the one who was like, Fanatics is what's really going to help take Perfect Game to the next level. That's going to unlock the revenue streams, just open up opportunities for these kids. That's what they need.
We're like a couple of news cycles away, by the way, from Fanatics or MLB just like running a protection racket for young families. Like you have to pay us $200. You have to pay $200 to the MLB commissioner's office just to play baseball anywhere here. Like that's really what we're progressing towards.
Mike, do you have thoughts on Morgan Sword outside of his name?
So what I was thinking about is if you thought that this was an abstruse discussion to begin with, I'm going to draw comparisons to the 2008 Russian presidential race.
No, that's where my mind went as well.
Back when, so like this, I was a student of international politics at the time, and I had a professor who was like one of the leading experts in Russian politics, and he actually taught Vladimir Putin at Leningrad State Law School in the 70s. So you guys are 2 degrees of separation from Vladimir Putin through me and Dr. Gordon Smith. Well, that's true. I don't know if
I could be 1 degree removed. You don't know that, but I can't reveal that here.
But anyway, there were 2 guys who were viewed as the potential heirs to Putin, Sergei Ivanov and Dmitry Medvedev. And Ivanov was like the betting favorite because this was back when people thought that Putin might adhere to something like term limits or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, Ivanov is like, he's the mini Putin. And so he'll just represent continuity. Medvedev was sort of like out there, viewed as forward thinking, maybe a little more pro-Western, who could take Putin's Russia into a more modern direction. And this is so my non-Rob Manfred guy on my shortlist was Dan Halem,
right?
Not Morgan Sword. But I think, Alex, you've talked me into Morgan Sword being the Dmitry Medvedev of Major League Baseball. And of course, as you remember, it was Medvedev and not Ivanov who succeeded Putin briefly as president of Russia.
Yeah, I do remember that very much so. I remember
Alex
where I was on that day.
Crushing those Reuters articles when he was in middle school. I think that is actually a really good comparison because not just because for a while Dan Halem was the betting favorite, but now it feels like people who are more quote unquote in the know believe that Morgan Sword will be the next commissioner of baseball. Just because Dan Halem got a lot of headlines when it comes to labor negotiations because he's the person in charge of that. And that's the path that Rob Manfred took.
Right, exactly.
And obviously the owners care. That's what they care about above all else. But I think that when we talk about the next commissioner, baseball, like all things, is a reactive sport, and so they react to the things that they did not like about Rob Manfred in his tenure. And one thing that I think that burned them from time to time is that Rob Manfred is kind of dumb. he comes out and says stuff that he could easily avoid and starts news cycles and causes all of this. And some people, us at various times, we've argued that that's an intentional strategy, that he is acting as a flak jacket for the owners, that he is absorbing the ire that in theory should be directed towards the owners, but they're asking him to do it instead. Morgan Sword is a smooth operator. From everybody who I've talked to who has met him, he is more of a cool. He's like fun. He's personable. He's pretty young.
He's an
he's
actual
39.
honest to God millennial.
Exactly.
Yes.
And he seemingly really does love baseball, whereas we've had those questions about Rob Manfred where he's like, I would get it tattooed on my forehead. Morgan Sword has been in charge. Morgan Sword is the pitch clock guy. He's largely thought of as the architect of the pitch clock and the person who pushed hardest for it within MLB headquarters. So I think that as we progress towards a world in which the owners realize they need to like hide their cravenness a little bit more because their actions are more on Front Street than they ever have been, bringing in someone who's like a nicer face for their colder behaviors, I think will be a priority. And I think that's why a lot of people think that Morgan Sword is lining himself up for the job more than Dan Halen will, even though I'm sure Dan Halen will wield a lot of power. And he was on my list as well, my long list.
To that, I think that one thing that's working in Morgan Sword's favor is that the constituencies to which he has to play the nice guy, the players, the public, large swaths of the baseball media, are very primed to accept anyone who isn't Rob Manfred as the good cop. And so he can just throw out the first pitch at Wrigley Field or sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game or some shit like that right after taking office. And people will be like, oh my God, this guy actually cares about the best interests of the game. Meanwhile, he's like selling rookie league players into slavery. You could probably get away with that with any kind of nicer face. I think that he's going to walk into a very gullible public.
It reminds me of like whoever takes over ownership of a team after a really terrible owner's tenure runs out. So like it's like the David Rubenstein thing, it's the John Middleton thing. It's
Bruce Sherman was viewed as a liberator.
I know. I know. This is like your
basically everybody but me. So
that was one of your biggest, like I really was right about this. This guy's a schmuck.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex, you have another pick.
Yes, it goes back to me. I think I'll take my owner pick right here and go with Colorado Rockies owner Dick Monfort.
This was my guy.
Who I think exactly to your point, Mike, is kind of the other side of the owner power structure, right? He speaks for the small market teams. He heads up the labor policy committee. He was also on that sort of economic reform committee and was, I think, one of the loudest voices in Rob Manfred's ear while the CBA was being negotiated a couple years ago. I think that a lot of the movement you see on the side of ownership to, strengthen the power of small market teams, or at least keep them from having to spend more basically like supporting them, making sure there's a welfare state that is supporting this class of small market teams. And I think that Dick Monfort's been very influential in keeping that intact, along with guys like John Fisher and Bob Nutting. But I think that like they wield significantly less influence when it comes to the actual labor policy, as opposed to Dick Monfort. So I'm happy to have him on my team because I'm a big fan. I already have his jersey, so I'm glad to lock it in.
The Fighting Monforts.
Crushing the names thing, by the way, because Dick Monfort, also a great name.
Yes, yeah, I got Sword and Dick.
I think that he, like the Game of Thrones spinoff. I think that he is like the type of owner that embodies what is different about baseball ownership than ownership in other sports. Like there is no reason his team sucks. They are an expansion franchise. So it's not even like he has the legacy behind him. He is not the most successful business person by a country mile among the MLB owners. And he's not particularly like bombastic or visible to the public. And yet, among this weird cabal of billionaires, he is the one who steps up for the 20 guys who don't actually really want to put a good baseball team on the field. And There's not really like a comparison for Dick Monfort in other sports. Whenever you hear about
not anymore. I mean, I could think of every owner in the NHL was like this 40 years ago.
Well, if
like
you expect me to know about NHL ownership, Mike, come on.
Yeah, I know. I'm
you
just
come
saying,
to the wrong
like,
place.
Dick Monfort is the 21st century Harold Ballard.
Sure.
Of
I
course.
know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Google it.
That landed for me.
Yeah. So Dmitry Medvedev plays, but Harold Ballard didn't.
You knew where you came. You signed up to come on this podcast on Saturday morning. Okay. All I know about the NHL right now is that the Rangers are cooking. Okay.
They
And
are
how does that
cooking.
make you feel? How does that make you feel?
Yeah, I don't feel anything.
Okay.
At least it's not that at least it's not the Devils or the Penguins.
This really has become a therapy session. You're just out here delivering I don't feel anything lines. I mean, I think it's a good pick. I think it's telling that we all kind of had Monfort on our list above a lot of the other owners. And I'm very curious to hear where you go for third place among the owners, Mike, but we'll get to that at some point.
I can leave that now.
Exactly.
I have not decided where I'm going to go. I have two options. Oh, you asked me for a slogan for a baseball team?
I did, yes.
Colorado Rockies. I don't know if this joke's going to play. This joke is hilarious if you were big into church youth group in the 2000s. But the Colorado Rockies, I kissed the World Series goodbye.
Sure. It didn't land for me, but we'll take it.
If you're out there, please tweet me at Michael Baumann if you thought that joke was funny.
I have a tough choice here, so it swings back to me. Okay, let me ask you guys this. Does Tony Clark count as an executive, or is he a wild card? I feel like he counts as an executive, right? Like he is an executive of sorts.
I actually put in my little notes, I put Morgan Sword down for executive, but I think should executive mean like
no, I think Morgan Sword's an
runs
executive.
a team. Okay.
But Alex got him. So
right. If Sword's an executive, I feel like Tony Clark's an executive.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to take Tony Clark in my executive slot here. This is the first representation of anybody who gives a shit about players, which do make up a large portion of the game. Now, whether or not Tony Clark wields his power in the way that we would like him to is not what we're talking about here. It's who has the most power and who could put it into practice. In theory, if they really wanted to, and that's in keeping with how I selected Mark Walter, but he maybe doesn't make all of these decisions that he could be about how to push the game into the directions that he wants to, but that power seemingly just lands at his foot because he is the owner of the Dodgers. I mean, Tony Clark just survived an ouster attempt, which seemed like it had some juice for a little while there, and he squashed it effectively to the point where we're literally not even talking about it anymore on the Baseball Labor podcast that is Tipping Pitches. And he's in charge of the union, which, should they ever decide to get super militant, they could completely halt the game overnight, in theory. I keep saying stuff like in theory, and I keep saying stuff like should they ever decide, because while Tony Clark is running it, it doesn't really seem like that's what they want to do. But circumstances could arise in which that is the right thing to do. And I think Tony Clark would be the consolidation of a lot of the more broader player power in terms of making the decisions and how to execute on those things. So I will take Tony Clark as my executive slot.
And you teed up my player pick perfectly, because I'm going to pick Shohei Ohtani as the most powerful player in baseball. And I think there is an enormous gap between 1 and 2. And like your point about power held and power exercised being two different things is so apt with Ohtani, who could he holds like a Taylor Swift like sway over public opinion. And just because he's so studiously non-controversial, his ability to put his thumb on the scale for any cause that he chooses, I think can't be overstated.
Do you think he'll ever do that?
No.
Do you think there could be any cause in which most of the players support that Ohtani could push it over the finish line?
I would be interested to see, particularly now, how he might be deployed in a potential lockout situation in a few years. But again, I think he's just so gun shy about, I also think it's possible just the personality is sort of like a more extreme version of Mike Trout, where like ball is life to the the exclusion of all other
Ball and secret Japanese wife is life.
Well, I was shocked that he got married, not because like it was weird that he would get married, but it's the first time the idea of Shohei Ohtani having sex, popped into my head.
Speak for yourself.
It's true. I did work with Ben Lindbergh for a long time.
Yeah, you really did.
But like, he's just so reluctant to show anything, to have any opinion other than I think hitting home runs is good. I think that's probably a smart way to go about business, but I'm really fascinated by the amount that he could bend the scales, if that's not the right metaphor. He could do something to the scales if he
could
had
even
he could
tip the scales.
Yeah, tip him.
Just like the pitches,
Yeah, if he had any inclination to do that.
He reminds me of like I think there's like a video, like a meme of like the baby, and there's like standing in front of a crowd, and every time the baby raises his arm, the crowd goes crazy, and it's like he doesn't really know what he's doing, but everyone is locked in, is like wrapped with attention for whatever he's going to do next.
And like in terms of would he stand up for whatever, like I think the US and Japan could go to war again. And he would be like, well, I don't know.
He's so fascinating. I don't want to talk about him in comparison to a lot of other players who maybe use their power a little bit more actively yet, just because Alex and I have not taken players yet. But I generally agree with your sentiment that he is the most powerful player by sheer popularity and income, and the fact that the league itself, a lot of the people who we have talked about already have hitched their wagon to him. Mm-hmm. Mark Walter was like, I hitched $700 million to him. Morgan Sword, who has been in charge of, along with other people, making baseball more watchable and palatable, is like, look at this guy. We want you to watch this guy. We want you to see more of this guy. And without that guy, there's a vacuum there, and that is power. If you leave, there becomes a vacuum. That's power. And Ohtani is that right now on the player side. You have another pick though.
Oh, I do. Oh boy. Do I want to go? Oh, I have no incentive to pick either owner or executive. So for executive, I'm going to go with Eric Neander, who runs baseball ops for the what's the name of the team? The Tampa Bay Rays.
That one.
I'm
not the Devil Rays.
I think that we might be swinging back that way with the City Connects.
Yeah.
In conversation with baseball being a copycat league, every team that wants to be successful is going to try to hire like the number two of this is how David Stearns got to run the Brewers. Like you pick or how Han Bloom, for instance, got to run the Red Sox. And this is where we run into Neander's Rays have been incredibly successful while spending no money. And that is like shooting the moon to owners. And so while he himself is sort of an Andrew Friedman disciple, and Friedman went and ran the Dodgers very successfully when endowed with not only his Rays voodoo, but $250 million a year to spend on payroll. We're seeing sort of second level Rays guys get poached by teams on the promise of, hey, we can win, but also we don't have to spend the money to win. And we saw that fail horrendously in Boston. And we're seeing that fail horrendously in Miami. And I think that Neander being the blueprint for the kind of GM that everybody wants to hire is, I don't know if it carries like he can raise armies with with a word, but it makes him a very influential person in baseball.
Yeah. He's like, what if Billy Bean's shit worked?
Yes.
Like that's powerful. Billy Bean has had a chokehold on baseball for the last 2 decades and didn't even have a sustained level of success. And Neander's saying, what if we meld that with the advancements of the 21st century or whatever, and actually just turned out a stable of bullpen arms that can throw like 101, whatever.
And it's instructive that like the reason you go to him and not the Theo Epstein guys, well, apart from the Theo Epstein guys occasionally sexually harassing reporters, is that like the Theo Epstein model, the Jed Hoyer model needs money to work, and theoretically the Rays model doesn't. But the only time we've ever seen it successfully exported was when it had the most money.
It's interesting, like, well, depends how successful you're talking about, though, because it's not like Eric Neander has won a World Series. You know, he's made it and he's done basically exactly what Stu Sternberg asked. I think that in terms of interpretation of power, I agree with your assessment that Neander, like what he does influences what other people do. And so that is powerful. But among like people, like let's say that Eric Neander and Dave Dombrowski were in a room together. Like Dave Dombrowski is winning that, whatever that means. He is a more powerful person like among baseball people. But in terms of what actually happens on the field, I think Neander is, I think, what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think Neander goes to Dombrowski and says the future is now, old man, in that conversation.
Would he be right though? Because the Phillies are better, you know? Like,
why does Dave Dombrowski keep getting fired after winning a World Series? Like, he's not the guy that people want.
Well, because all executives are less powerful than owners, you know?
Right.
Like he loses
and
that
so
fight.
He's just happened to float around to whichever owner wants to brute force a pennant winner.
I feel like that is power though. Convincing owners who by nature do not want to spend their money if they don't have to, convincing 4 different owners to spend a lot of money and build a winning baseball team in the 21st century. I mean, there's something that he's doing that is powerful. There's like
I don't know that he really convinced. I don't know that. I don't know if I'd call that managing up in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, the Red Sox, you know, empowered Ben Cherington to go spend to win a World Series. The Phillies empowered Ruben Amaro to go.
That was a good decision.
Come close
right?
to winning a World Series.
You loved that, right?
I see him around the press box all the time now. And like, I feel like I owe him like a little bit of an apology for how I wrote about him when I was a blogger, but also he doesn't make it easy.
You don't owe him anything. That's not what this is about, you know? Like when Alex sees John Boy, he's not going to go apologize to him.
No, you shouldn't, by the way.
No, never.
What are you going to apologize to John Boy for? Like,
no, I have nothing to say to that man whatsoever.
Yeah, like,
I'll film him from afar and then go back and do my own.
You made fun of you know, the J School thing, but one thing you learned there is it's only libel if it's not true. So
exactly.
What other lessons did you take from J School, Baumann? I was just talking about this last night. Do you feel
What
like you
other
use your J School education on a day-to-day basis?
somewhat, I think like it's an interesting question that I'm going to hem and haw about, and you're going to have to.
More valuable, your time blogging about the Phillies or your time learning to write leads in J School?
Probably for this specific job, blogging about the Phillies, but also that's
not the only job you've had.
Right. Well, this is like one of the 1% of jobs in baseball where that's true. And I wouldn't have been able to blog about the Phillies as well as I had, if not
for
J School. I would say like arguably I learned more from working at the student newspaper and interning it at a tech magazine when I was in college than I did from like actual school. But I think this isn't an academic pursuit. It's a trade. And so you learn through apprenticeship.
Right. Podcasting is a trade too. You know, we are the blue collar workers of the future.
We could go down this route if you want to.
You seem unconvinced. So I'm going to go.
Yeah.
I'm going to make my selection. Boy, this is tough. I'm torn. I feel like I'm going to save my player for last because there are kind of a lot of players who are in the same zone in terms of their power. And I'm also going to try to screw you guys over on a technicality for that, but we'll get there when we get there. I'm going to select Jason Robbins, who is the chief executive officer of DraftKings.
That's a good one.
And I'm going to select him in my wild card slot. DraftKings seems to be DraftKings as well as like MGM Casino. Those two seem to be the two favored sports betting partners of Major League Baseball. I would trust DraftKings to be the one to last throughout the long haul. There's always a chance.
I do all of mine on Bet365.
Right, exactly. And with what's his name? The guy who's under federal indictment.
Oh, I made the joke about him last night. Matthew Bowyer.
That's your guy, right?
Yeah, right,
you and him go way back.
Yeah,
I think that DraftKings is the one that partners neatly with like MLB's desire to continue to expand into the digital world and just like microtransaction their consumers to death. And if Jason Robbins is like, this is what you need, this is the direction you need to push the game to be able to continue to get this sweet, sweet DraftKings money, God damn it. Everybody who we've talked about on this list is going to be like, yes, sir, I will do that, sir. Thank you for your advice, sir. And he might not be the CEO of DraftKings for very long, but you know what I mean by choosing this. It could have been Amy Howe at FanDuel. It could have been any of these people in charge of these casinos. These people right now are the equivalent of even more consolidated cable executives from 25 years ago. And they are worse people than the cable executives. Because at least the cable executives were like, yeah, we want to get really, really, really fucking rich, but it's for like kind of a good thing to allow more people to watch baseball. This is like
we want to do something. We want to get rich by doing something.
Yes,
as opposed to just getting rich from being the middleman.
Yes, by taking dividends on numbers in an app. And so that is my selection, Jason Robbins from DraftKings.
That's a really, I think DraftKings was sort of really influential in, I feel like, the growth of daily fantasy sports, which sort of laid the groundwork for, I think, the growth of sports betting that we've seen over the last couple of years. It feels like it kind of primed the pump among a lot of fans to get comfortable with putting your money where your mouth is when it comes to baseball analysis or whatever. Not limited to baseball, but
and in the early days, like DraftKings, they were the ones that were like in legal battles against New York City and New York State. You know, like they were the center point of the lobbying effort. Frankly, like them and some other companies were like really on that front wave. Now there's a lot of places that you can do stuff like this, but I think DraftKings and FanDuel are like the alpha and the omega of like I open my phone and place bet. I lament the amount of power that they wield, but it would be dishonest to go through this exercise without it acknowledging it. It's everywhere. I mean, it's literally everywhere. Yeah. And the other thing about DraftKings is that like they wield power in media too. They have their own like media wing. They partner with a lot of like the league, the journalists who have been pushed out of their corners of the world. This is a huge thing
in the BBWA right now.
Yeah.
Is to what extent should gambling writers be allowed to be credentialed media?
I feel like, I don't know, is this like a hot take or is this like an anti-journalist to take to say that they shouldn't?
So, yeah. So like at the last meeting, like there were some of the conversation was about like how to write rules keeping them out of the BBWA that don't like splash back on people who write about fantasy.
Right.
And so like, which I don't know, like I guess like intuitively, I think of fantasy baseball as legitimate in a way that I don't think of gambling. And I think that's probably the majority opinion, but you know, if you drill down on it, like it's hard to write a definition that includes one but not the other. But anyway, like this is the next frontier, like not next frontier, but like this is a rearguard action that actual baseball media is fighting right now, is against people who just want to be in the clubhouse for gambling information.
It's not good.
No. So yeah.
Okay. That was my third selection. We now go to you, Alex, for your final two.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I wrote down one player. And he's already been taken. So I'm gonna punt that to my last pick.
That's why I threw myself in front of Ohtani.
That was smart. I
couldn't believe my luck.
Before you do your final two picks, because you still have to do your player, and I think Baumann is satisfied with the fact that he got Ohtani.
Yeah.
Does this have to be an active player in your guys' minds? Were you considering this like these have to be active players who are on rosters right now?
You want to slide Tony Clark over?
No, I don't. I don't want to slide Tony Clark
I would say
over.
It has to be like an active player or like someone who could credibly be called an active player.
So you have to cross Alex Rodriguez.
So not
because I know that's where your mind was going.
I mean, A-Rod,
John Smoltz or something like that.
Well, A-Rod was on my long list. Smoltz was not on my long list. Let's not be fucking ridiculous here, Baumann. But Pedro and David Ortiz, I think, were two guys where it's like they're players. They're also kind of like media members now.
Yeah, tough shit. Those guys are media members now.
Okay, fine. I'm happy with my Jason Robbins wildcard slot. I don't need to replace him with David Ortiz.
I'll do my wildcard spot first. This one is maybe a little bit more of a, say, the equivalent of picking a prospect. But I'm going to go with Diamond Baseball Holdings, who probably wield very little power at this exact moment. Although with each passing day, I feel like the scope of their involvement in the game and their power over sort of the shape of the minor leagues grows. And I feel like it's one of those things where, like, we get a story about them every sort of couple months, and I'm like, okay, they have their set list of a dozen teams that they own. And then by the next time a story comes out about them, that list has grown by another dozen. And I logged into LinkedIn this past week and saw they'd acquired a couple more teams. And they feel like the sort of, they are the kind of ownership that can only exist in today's modern game, in the wake of sort of the restructuring of the minor leagues and the allowance of being able to own more than, like, I think 7 teams, I think was the cap last, right? They are at 38, 33, and they could own, I think, up to like 58 or something like that. So they haven't wielded any of their power yet, so to speak, but I feel like in the next sort of decade or two of how the minor league sort of continues to, whether it's consolidate or just calcify into what it exists as right now, I feel like they will be influential in that. And also just like proof of concept of professional baseball as an investment vehicle. Like, they just snapped up a portfolio of baseball teams with relatively low risk in an insulated economic environment that, broadly speaking, is probably going to go up in value. I think they are in an indication to the market that, like, yes, this is alive and well. This is a good investment. You can sell your team and make money from it. You can buy a team and make money from it. So again, that's why I say, like, it's not like they've done anything yet besides, like, move a couple teams or upgrade some facilities. But I think the coming years will be very telling in sort of how they wield the power that they do, for better or for worse, have.
Just for the sake of the list, would you like to choose one of the 2 guys who represent Diamond Baseball Holdings? That's Pat Battle, who's the executive chairman, and Peter Freund, who I think is thought to be the guy he was the one who used to be.
It's got to be Battle, right? Dick, Battle, and Sword.
Yes, sure. I will. I'll pick. What is it? Pat Battle.
Pat Battle. He's the money guy. Peter Freund is the guy he's the CEO.
I always go with the money guy.
He's the CEO. He used to be an owner of a minor league team, and that's why the league sort of like handpicked him as to pair with Pat Battle to push Diamond Baseball Holdings into the future and to enact MLB's vision of one baseball across 38 teams or however many they own. Okay, great. That was a great note by you, Baumann. This is excellent work all around. I feel like we're really humming at this moment.
Yeah.
What do you think about Diamond Baseball Holdings, Mike? We haven't talked about this.
I don't know. I feel like I don't actually have a very good intuitive handle on, like, how the way that the minor leagues are going is going to affect baseball as a whole. I think so for instance, like, when there was minor league contraction, I was alone in sort of lefty baseball circles and thinking, like, obviously having less baseball is probably bad, but in terms of player development, like, I don't know that it's going to make a huge negative difference in terms of, like, keeping the reserve list or shrinking the reserve list and contracting a few teams. And it does seem like, I don't know, there was the article about Jackson Holiday and, like, the lack of the reserve army of quad A pitchers, and, you know, how it left him maybe unprepared for the major leagues. So I don't know. There's an optimistic version of, like, a consolidated minor leagues that says, like, you know, it's run for its own sake. Maybe it expands more. Maybe it, like, you know, stands on its own 2 feet and attracts fans. Cause, like, I was a baseball obsessed kid who, you know, going to major league games was not financially viable all the time for my family, but we went to a ton of minor league games because, you know, it's like a better place to introduce your kids to the sport. And, you know, having less of that makes me upset. But any new investment vehicle just feels like a scam to me. At this point in the history of the sport. So, I don't want to criticize people for doing things they haven't already done, but I'm just sort of generally pessimistic about any change in ownership.
Yeah, well, the fact that we've learned so little about them, I feel like feeds that anxiety even more. Like, I'd rather they just be upfront. If they were just like, this is just an investment vehicle, I'd be like, okay. But at least I can mentally prepare for that.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop where they're going to be like, and now we're going to develop a new artificial intelligence to develop minor league baseball players. And instead of actually playing each other on the field, we're going to create avatars of each player. And then those avatars are going to play each other. And then we're going to get more data about how they should perform when they actually do get to the majors. Like that's coming. Anytime one investment firm owns this level of control over like a group of things, it's going to become a testing ground for all of their emerging technologies. Is what we will.
I wouldn't mind that. Like, I would.
You wouldn't
support,
mind the
like,
AI-ification of minor league baseball?
No,
You're
sorry.
on record about that now,
limited quarantine, you got to quarantine the AI. I just did this mission of Mass Effect. Like, you got to keep the AI off of the mainframe system. So, like, if you had like a lab league, like that's something that I've stomped my feet for. But yeah, I mean,
so what you're saying is you want all the water fountains at minor league baseball stadiums to be replaced by soda streams.
I tell you what, that's a take that is aged really well in not a lot of time.
Every time I see a soda stream, I think of you every time now.
Yep.
It's like it's like that's your faces on there. I'm gonna start getting stickers with your face on them and putting them on soda streams around America. All right, Alex, you have to make your final pick now.
I know. I was letting you guys go. I don't feel confident about. I have to take a player.
Yeah.
I think that Mike's point is right, that the gap between Ohtani and sort of the rest of the power brokers among players is grown significantly. I mean, I suppose I could pick Max Scherzer, who is...
Oh, yeah. He's still an active player, isn't he?
Who is still technically an active player and has, at least historically, been influential on the players' side of negotiations. I think he's the only active player who I've seen gallivanting around Capitol Hill. He is... I think among players seen as a level-headed, clear-eyed veteran who sort of understands the dynamics in the game and is not necessarily afraid to advocate for player rights. Now, I mean, how far that goes, I don't really know necessarily, because I think the power ultimately lies with the labor lawyers and the Tony Clarks and the Bruce Myers, etc. But I still think Scherzer, I mean, he played an outsized role in sort of being a conduit between the executive sort of committees and I think the rest of the players on how the negotiation goes. So I'm going to stop vamping because I don't have a ton of more to say about Max Scherzer, but I think he has historically wielded power, even if he may be shortly on his way out.
So he is going to be your selection then.
He is my go-to. I said I could pick him,
and in
but
fact,
I'm not
you
going
will.
to.
I feel like
not pick him after talking about him for.
Well, I feel like he's the pretty obvious second selection if we're limiting it to active players, and he is who I was going to pick if you did not pick him. He's like the union guy, like he it was the loudest and most, I think, clear-eyed voice in the room the last negotiations through. He was the one who was like, we can get these thresholds up for the for the taxes. We should vote no on this. Like, he was the one who was leading all of these charges. I think the point about him being on his way out is well taken. Also, he's the highest paid player in the league, basically. So he is a trailblazer and he's still active. And personality wise, we've been talking a lot about the idea of like, how much power do you have versus how much do you actually wield of that power? I think he probably has the highest ratio of that. He's actually like wielding that power. He actually puts it into effect. I gotta say, I'm pretty shocked that the name Scott Boras has not been mentioned yet on this so far.
I mean, he's not as powerful as Trump. Like, feels like this is on you guys. Like, you created this taxonomy, and then you picked the fucking DraftKings guy. So,
I mean, I picked Tony Clark in the slot. I guess Boris is
he's not an executive. Like,
he's an executive of Boris Corp. Where would you put him else in this? I guess
I would put him in wild card. He doesn't work for the league or the union. He works for his own separate business interest.
That is true. Do you think that Boris is more powerful than the DraftKings guy?
Well, no, I don't.
That? Okay.
So, like, this is like the actual answer to that question. I think this is the first time. So, like, I've been a baseball fan longer than you guys have been alive. And this is the first time in all of that time that I've felt like Scott Boras has been weak. I think he really took it in the chin this offseason. And I think that there is
You're saying like physically weak, like you could take him in a fist fight, is what you're trying to say?
Boris is like, he's got a good base and a low center of gravity. So I'm not going to.
What was your strategy?
Probably not.
You take it to the ground then? Because
yeah, I have to. Right, I mean, it's not too dissimilar to my strategy for beating up Zach Cram, which is like I'd have to catch him first, but
you'd never catch him. The guy can run for 5 hours straight.
I know.
You better get in your car.
Hope that it's like in a boxing ring. Like maybe we can talk, but like once I get him, he's not getting away. Whereas Boris, I think, has the low center of gravity and the tenacity to really win a ground and pound.
And he could distract you with his words,
Man, I would, first of all, like, this is the closest thing that we have in sports. I've said this before. It's the closest thing we have in sports now to Muhammad Ali is Boris's annual winter meetings pun fest. Like, who else talks like that in the history of mainstream American sports?
Nobody talks like that.
No one.
Exactly. So in this very limited respect, Scott Boras is like Muhammad Ali. But I also think that there's a sense from like the other big agencies that this guy has been steering the ship for too long. And we saw that reflect itself in the minor league palace coup, or not the minor league, the Union Palace coup. And there's a target on his back. And there's been a target on his back, but for the first time, he hasn't delivered the goods to back it up. So it's one of 100 reasons why I think Juan Soto's free agency is going to be so fascinating. But I don't think that Scott Boras is even necessarily the most powerful agent in baseball at this moment in time.
Well, thank you for that beautiful segue, because for player, I am going to select Juan Soto because I think he is actually going to sign the biggest contract ever. If you price adjust Ohtani's contract, I think Juan Soto is going to beat that in this offseason. And there has been a litany of players who have had that moniker. I think Soto is one of the people who is young enough and good enough to live up to it for long enough that it continues to perpetuate this shape of contract. I think that there is a handful of guys who maybe I could have selected here who are, young and so talented and on big contracts that, they are powerful by nature of the fact that they got owners to give them $250 million. Like I think Julio Rodriguez is on that list. I think Bobby Witt Jr. is on that list. I mean, maybe David Rubenstein will put a number of the Orioles players on that list. We'll see. But Soto, in keeping with the conversation that we just had about Scott Boras, he is basically like the avatar for Scott Boras's power heading into this offseason. And I think Scherzer is that as well. So I think we're all kind of talking about the same zone of power here in the Soto, Scherzer, Boras conversation. But it's tough because like there's a reason that Soto is so far behind someone like Ohtani and even behind someone like Scherzer. And I think part of that reason is that at the end of the day, he is kind of just a corner outfielder who's not that involved in the union. But at the same time, like he could hold up the financial structure of a free agent contract and he could kind of redefine that. And guys like Miguel Cabrera, guys like Alex Rodriguez have done that in the past, and we're still seeing the ripple effects of those kinds of contracts. So I do think that he does carry a lot of power among the players, on top of the fact that he is Dominican and we do not have any player really representing the cohort of Dominican players and more broadly Latino players in baseball who have united interests on some things and very often try to push issues forward about player development internationally. And that's why, like, when I was talking about a guy like David Ortiz, I think one thing that's underrated about Ortiz is that, like, he just has a huge presence in international baseball more broadly and how development gets carried out and like what the international free agent draft might look like. Like, these conversations happen in circles that maybe we're not always privy to in like public coverage of baseball. So I think that probably Juan Soto is third amongst the 3 players who have been drafted so far, but still extremely powerful if he were willing to like sit on it and not sign for a while. You know, he could change some things.
I think if he doesn't, the Union's in a tight spot in terms of the top of that market. Because I thought Ohtani I thought like the sticker price, 10 years, $700 million, like gave the rest of the league a lot of room to elevate those top tier salaries. And finding out that it's actually 10, practically like 10, 4, was it 58 or yeah. That doesn't raise the bar as much as it should have. And Soto's got to beat that, or else it's going to depress. It's going to kind of do what the second Trout extension did, which is depress salaries at the top of the market for maybe 5 years. And I don't know who the next guy coming behind him is, because now Bobby Witt Jr. and Julio Rodriguez and Fernando Tatis they're all locked into these long pre-arb contracts. So I think there is a lot of pressure on Soto. But my second player pick probably would have been Francisco Lindor, because
I thought about that, but like, is he actually that powerful? Like, he's on the second most important team in his own city. He's on the executive subcommittee, but like,
he's
to what extent
the Scherzer now? He's the most famous, venerable player on the committee. And I also think 2 of the guys who are like not the superstars on that committee, Jack Flaherty and Lance McCullers, are 2 guys who are good at I think a really underrated part of Union strategy and execution, which is riling up the rank and file and communicating to the player base. I mean, we saw there's a reading of the MLBPA Palace coup that is like Jack Flaherty inspired this by accident.
Yep.
Just by being on the wrong Zoom call at the wrong time without realizing what he was doing. And so, you know, it's
by hearing what they were saying and thinking, oh, those are some good ideas.
Yeah. And so like that says a lot in terms of the sway that he holds for not a very good pitcher at this point in time.
Yeah. Well, I really thought about all of those executive subcommittee guys, and I feel like I couldn't get there with Lindor. I don't, across the league, I don't know that a lot of people really like listen to what he says, even though he's in a position of leadership in the Union. I think ultimately, like, pushing the top end of the market is so valuable to other players in the Union that they consider those guys to be the most important guys. And Scherzer was both of those things.
Yeah,
so he was like the highest paid player and the guy who was leading the charge in the Union. So like, I don't know. It's. I think I would listen to a compelling argument that Lindor could have been a player selected here, but maybe Soto.
I think he's among a class of players who it's hard to opine about too, right? I mean, we don't know how these conversations are going in the back. Lindor may well be passing around Communist Manifesto copies. Like, I mean,
that would be fucking awesome.
Which would be amazing. And so much of this happens behind closed doors and in casual conversations that I think that element is sometimes hard to quantify what power looks like in that regard.
Honestly, long list of players, Brandon Nimmo. You know, this guy is out here like moaning and groaning about the jerseys every week and like getting the PA to complain about them. And he is a player representative for the Mets, you know, like Mets with a lot of like weirdly top heavy representation in the MLB Players Association. I find that very fascinating.
Mets are coming to town next week. I'm going to take this into the clubhouse.
It's for the listener. That was the Marx Engels reader.
What do you think? Do you think like Brandon Nimmo, if you put that in his locker, he would like ask them to like sanitize it, like take it away and wipe it down with some Lysol?
I think he would politely decline to touch it in the first place.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah, like I wouldn't like just drop it in his locker, but
if he touched it,
saying,
he would be like,
Brandon, you should read this red book I've got.
Right. Well, you just put like a Jordan Peterson, like, you know,
cover
like around it, you know, exactly.
That
Like
is
that.
a really funny idea. Okay. I believe that leaves it at your feet, Mike, for the final selection of the Power Brokers draft.
I'm going to go slightly more fun and optimistic than like the most cynical interpretation possible. I'm going to pick David Rubenstein for my third owner. Jerry Reinsdorf was the other guy, but Jerry Reinsdorf just fucking depresses me. So I'd rather talk about the potential for Rubenstein to be a positive actor. He is maybe the last one of these we're ever going to get, like the idealized sports owner, like the local kid who made his, billions doing something not to single out Steve Cohen, but like not, horrifically suspect.
It's not horrifically suspect, to be clear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like, designing car bombs for bassinets or something, which is like, what you have to do to, no, because actually it's worse, because if you make billions of dollars designing car bombs for bassinets, you've actually constructed something. And,
but like Rubenstein is like a private equity guy too. So like he was the one who was like moving the money through the accounts of the people who were designing car bombs for bassinets. So like,
but he's also never been, to my knowledge, under, federal investigation. So
not yet.
That's true.
Not yet.
So, he's the local guy made good. I listened to his interview on opening day on the Orioles broadcast, and I was very heartened by the thickness of his Baltimore accent. Mm-hmm. So he's got the local bona fides. And like the idea of the owner as somebody as like a civic trustee, I think he fits that archetype very well. And that team is very well positioned to benefit from that kind of owner. I'm not saying he has to, go blow the luxury tax away every year, but even, taking the Orioles back into the top half of payroll with the amount of talent they have on the roster they could win 105, 110 games every year for the next 5 years if he wants to. And so what we are either going to see is a model of good ownership that raises the bar for small market teams in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, other places where they're theoretically building up to competitiveness, or it's going to kill for good and all the neoliberal myth of the good owner. Either that or lung cancer is going to kill John Middleton. So it's a one of those two things is going to happen pretty soon.
That like the cigarette executives never die from lung cancer. They live forever because of all of the money. I have a very important question for you, Mike, and I feel like you are truly, really primed to be the right person to answer this question. Alex and I have discussed at great length the historical documents that David Rubenstein has purchased. Is there a historical document out there? You're aware of this, right? That he owns a copy of the Magna Carta.
I was yelling at somebody about how overrated the Magna Carta was.
Well, exactly. So I know that you'll have opinions about this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What document do you think David Rubenstein should pursue to purchase? Because this is on our bingo card.
And it can be had for the low price of, there's not even a price listed. You could probably get this on Amazon for like $15.
Okay, but it has to be original copy.
That's Praxis.
Praxis. How many copies of the Marx Engels reader could you buy and put in Baltimore public schools for $1 billion?
Enough to make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what's the number one document that you'd like him to go after?
The Japanese Instrument of Surrender for World War II.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it does kind of fit with his preferences. He likes sort of like broadly America's good documents,
Yeah.
Like he has the 13th Amendment as well. And I think an Emancipation Proclamation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All I know is like the Magna Carta is like the really impressive one, because it's like I think it's the only copy in North America and the only copy that's privately owned.
Yes.
Yeah,
but that's the limits of my knowledge of his collection. But it also says that he's pretty easily impressed, as if like Magna Carta is held up like, oh, this is the invention of democracy, and it's not democracy, and it wasn't the first implementation of democracy, and it lasted like about as long as Gunnar Henderson's major league career. So it feels like if you're holding it up as this like titanic document of human history,
But it was just like the first document that said anything about kings not being able to do whatever they wanted.
I mean, apart from de facto democratic societies all across the world for thousands of years before that.
Sure, but we don't acknowledge those because those aren't the same Western people that we recognize.
Right, well, and I would say there is nothing less democratic than saying it only counts if the English did it. Like that's the
well, exactly.
I think like that shows you, you look at, the Roman Republic was obviously not a democracy in any way that we would recognize, but it wasn't the divine right of kings. I don't know, just imagine like being a society that culturally is 1,500 years behind the Italians. Like I would feel so much shame about that. Like you couldn't, the CIA could not waterboard the existence of the Magna Carta out of me if my civilization had done that.
Okay, David Rubenstein by the Japanese Instrument of Surrender Challenge. That's it. That's all. That's everybody's selection. Let's do a quick recap here. Mike, you went first. You selected Donald J. Trump as your wild card, Shohei Ohtani as your player, Eric Neander as your executive, and David Rubenstein as your owner. I went second. I selected
bipartisan coalition, by the way.
Right, you just did it.
Yes,
Trump
exactly.
and Rubenstein.
Right, you just passed the House budget bill. Congratulations. I went second. I selected Mark Walter as my owner, Tony Clark, leader of the Major League Baseball Players Association. Did I select him so that he will come on this podcast? Maybe I did. As my executive, Jason Robbins as my wild card. He's the CEO of DraftKings. And Juan Soto as my player. Alex, you selected Sword, Dick, Battle, and Max. Congratulations. You did it. You really did it. Morgan Sword is your executive. Dick Monfort is your owner. Pat Battle as your wild card. And Max Scherzer as your player. How do you guys feel? Do you feel like we did it? We did this exercise? Long list, short list, honorable mentions of names that didn't come up or that maybe that you would have expected to be drafted?
I feel like we at least talked about most of the people. My one working member of the media that I had on my long list was Jeff Passan, because I think he's got the capacity to meaningfully shape public opinion in a way that very few like individuals do just by the force of their own argumentation. Right.
So. If you stopped reading his mentions long enough. Yeah.
if you stop replying to Ben Verlander, definitely.
You considered choosing Ben Verlander first overall, Alex, right? But then you remembered that he was banned on this podcast, and that's why he was DQ'd. Right. Yeah,
right. So it was mostly a technicality,
right? Exactly.
For the record, I was, I'm maybe not surprised, but I had a good amount of like MLB PA adjacent folks on my list, and I feel like, I think we had a good amount of representation in there. But, if we had done this draft 6 months ago, I think we would have been talking a lot about a guy like Harry Marino.
Yeah.
Right? I know we were joking about that in our text thread before. Bruce Meyer did not make anyone's list as well.
Hired gun.
Fate is tied very closely to Tony Clark's as well. And then there's some other labor lawyers there who were instrumental in negotiating the CBAs, whose like names are never discussed because we don't talk about general counsels on this podcast.
Dude, I gotta say, Rob Manfred was the first person that I wrote down, and he didn't get picked.
It's not interesting.
Right.
It's not interesting, but it's also not accurate to say that he's not one of the 12 most powerful people in the baseball world. Morgan
he's more
Sword,
powerful than Tony Clark. No, he's probably more powerful than Eric Neander too.
Morgan Sword only does it if Rob Manfred says yes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, I think maybe we all got too cute.
But there is a bit of a I don't know. There was a sort of lame duck way of thinking that I was, when I was thinking about this sort of thing, right? It's like, yes, he's been very influential. I'm also kind of like, what else do you have to do? At this point, you're kind of tying up your loose ends and getting ready to transition out. With people are asking him about the A's stadium stuff, and he's kind of like, it's not really our business. Like, what do you mean?
That didn't stop you from picking Scherzer, though.
No, so. Right. That's true. Yes.
Yeah, you were sort of between a rock and a hard place on players, though, because players are not powerful at all.
One player. There isn't a player like this yet, but if there were, I would probably pick him. A name that kept coming to mind was Max Clark, who nobody's going to care about because he's going to be at best the 7th best player from his own draft class. But which
makes him deeply, deeply interesting to you.
So he's interesting for a couple reasons, but he's like one of the first players to harness like his generation's social media and like self-marketing. Like the first good big leaguer, and it could be him, he could be a good big leaguer, but the first star who knows how to think like a TikTok influencer, I think is going to be huge. And there was talk about Drew Jones, who might just not be any good. But when I interviewed Clark at the draft combine last year, and like I have never been, no, that's not true. I'm not true. I've never been, but I was very aware that I was being worked when I was talking to him. And like, this was like a 17, 18-year-old kid. And like, you know what you're doing more than most 35-year-olds that I've run into in the business. And he, I think, understands how to get, attention from his generation in a way. We think about like guys like Brandon McCarthy, who were good on Twitter in the previous generation. The first like superstar who's good on TikTok or whatever comes after the government bans TikTok. I think it's going to be the second most famous player in baseball apart from Ohtani.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Paul Skeens just by virtue of getting rinsed up by Livy.
I was about to say, I thought about her putting her on my list, but
that would have been
getting too cute.
That would have been way too cute. If you put Livy Dunn on the list, that would have been like, all right, I would have booed that.
But if I don't know, like if Wyatt Langford had Clark's like innate media savvy, I think somebody like that could be very influential within the game.
One guy whose name came up who did not get selected because he's kind of like between influential positions right now was Theo Epstein.
Yeah.
I thought about choosing him. I think if we did this exercise 2 years ago, I probably would have chosen him in my executive slot because they seem like they gave him carte blanche to be like, dude, fix this game, fix baseball. And he could have taken it in a lot of different ways. And he was kind of like the media guy that they were trotting out to shape public opinion, which I think was a very powerful position for him to be in. And he was, I think, really up to the task. Like he did change a lot of hearts and minds. And he created the cult of personality around like the whiz kid GM, which I think gives him a lot of cachet among the powerful people too. Even if like maybe he doesn't control how 100 million baseball fans think, he does really have the ear of everyone in the commissioner's office, universal approval there, everybody in the ownership suite, universal approval there. He could get hired in 27 GM jobs today if he wanted to. Yeah. And so I think that he is very powerful, but maybe dormant right now. And that's why he didn't get selected. 2 other people, real quick for you. Actually, 3 other people, because it's like a co-situation. Jimmy Pitaro, who is in charge of ESPN. Television partners, the national television partners for baseball. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're powerful by virtue of the fact that they're like, we're not that interested in baseball right now. They are watering down the power of all of the other people on the list right now. And as well as Mark Silverman and Eric Shanks, who run Fox Sports and just Fox more broadly, their broadcast department.
One of the names on my long list was Luis Silverwasser from Turner for the exact same reason.
But I think that side of the business is too spread out and too diluted for any one person to be powerful enough. Like ESPN is not just so dominant right now that Jimmy Pitaro is like, hey, Rob Manfred, do this. He's like, well,
it doesn't have the World Series. That's
and even Fox, like, do they care enough about baseball to tell Mark Walter to do this? No, I don't think so. So that was kind of all of the people on my list. As well as like, I had like a more retired players than current players. Ken Griffey Jr., I mentioned Ortiz and Pedro Martinez, A-Rod and Derek Jeter. I think if we did this exercise 5 years ago, I probably would have chosen Joe Torre potentially. But that's it. That exhausts my list.
Joe Torre's been put to the Morgan sword as the on-field ops guy.
How about you, Alex? Any other names that haven't come up yet?
No, I started like just reading MLB.com's masthead.
Yeah,
that's where I was like, oh, Noah Garden, the guy who came up with the on jersey patches and the City Connect uniforms. Well, he's important to me.
He's on my list.
He wields a lot of power in my personal life.
Tony Regans? Anybody Tony Regans heads out there?
But then again, I got into a place where I'm like, I'm picking like marketing executives.
Yeah.
Like they would love if they were getting included on this list. I cannot stroke their ego with that.
Okay.
That was a bit of a power move right there. Saying like, I would love to, you could have gassed these guys up, and
I'm not going to
withheld your approval.
You got to earn that.
Next time we do this exercise, it will be the power brokers among baseball podcasters, and we'll see how that goes. Mike, you teased a free consumer rant for the listener before this podcast.
We were talking
started.
about like the efficacy of government, and we're going to go back to
3 guys Saturday morning.
It's all you and I talk about. But I just want to say, like, I love going to the DMV. I think that DMV jokes are a psyop from Reagan's CIA. Because, like, they popped up around the same time. They're talking about the DMV is like this unnecessary thing that takes up a bunch of your time. That it's all this paperwork. And every time I actually go to the DMV or like have to do anything related to my car, which I've already admitted on this podcast is an unnecessary and expensive appendage of the urban design hellscape that we've all been forced to live in. Every time I go, it's efficient. I go in there and get my car inspected to make sure it's not going to kill the earth or kill me. And I'm in and out and it's free. And like, I got to renew my registration. I can do that online. Like you can make appointments. I love to see the government working. And I just think about how horrific this would be if the cable company ran car registration. Just think about any private equity or private entity that has to extract a profit from this process. And they say, government's inefficient. Government has waste. Government has bloat. Government has red tape. At least government's designed to work. Whereas private industry or private business is designed to extract your time and money from you. And just that ontological difference creates so much buffer for the government to be inefficient or to be whatever, the Robert Moseses of the world want to accuse it of being. It just, every time I interface with the government, it's just so much better than interfacing with private service providers.
That was beautiful. I truly believe in the power of government. However, your DMV take is extremely suburban privilege. You've never been to the Kings County DMV at the
I've been to the
Atlantic
Harris
Terminal.
County DMV in Texas. Like that was a nightmare. But in New Jersey, like we think that government should provide services. Whereas in Texas is
New York also thinks that too. And again, if you go to the DMV in Brooklyn,
New York doesn't think the government should work. New York elected Eric Adams as mayor. That's not the act of people who think government should work.
You don't support New York being the Istanbul of America?
Sorry, as of yesterday,
I think that's really harsh on Istanbul.
Oh yeah, dude.
If New York fell into the sea tomorrow, I wouldn't shed a tear.
Bro, well, okay, take it down a notch.
Oh my God.
Eric Adams swindling New York to pay for him to go to Rome is probably actually the coolest thing he's ever done. Like, let's be real about that, Alex.
Yes. And then just tweeting about it.
I know.
Being like, here I am.
By the way, you want to know who paved the path for that level of naked graft? Donald J. Trump, number one pick in the baseball power
right. That's exactly right.
Do we have Adams if we don't have Trump?
No, I don't think so.
No, I actually don't think we do.
We just have another de Blasio,
I mean,
rip.
You'd saw off your arm for an ineffectual liberal as mayor of New York right now.
Yeah, man. We didn't know how good we had it. This is bringing back old tipping pitches where we're just talking about New York City mayors.
Local politics.
Yeah. Bill de Blasio, NYU grad. If Bill de Blasio were on this call, that would make you still the only person who didn't go to NYU, Baumann.
Well, you have to have me on as like someone who went to public school to speak for the common man on your labor podcast.
Exactly. You're our flyover state representative.
Yeah.
Okay, that is Michael Baumann, our flyover state representative. He writes at FanGraphs. He writes for a cycling newsletter. Mike, where can people find that good stuff? wheeliesports.substack.com. I'm writing about the Giro d'Italia, which is going on right now.
It's $5 a month, although I do a lot of free posts because not a whole lot of people want to read my cycling writing enough to pay for it. But if you're one of those people, please come and pay for my newsletter. The Tour de France and the Olympics are coming up, so we're going to have a hot summer.
Thank you for all of this free labor that you provided us, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Yeah.
The power of love is a curious thing. Make a one man weep, make another man sing.
Thanks to Mike. Thanks to Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev. Thanks to Marks and Engels.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to Glenn Powell. Thanks to
Livy Dunn.
Livy Dunn. Thanks to my mom. Thanks to your mom.
Yeah.
Thanks to the radiation wave that allowed us to see the Northern Lights throughout the rest of the world, believing in participation trophies. Thank you to everyone who's a patron, even though there's no new patrons this week. Thanks to you, Alex. Thanks to Morgan Sword for all of his work on the pitch clock, which I was always in favor of. Thanks to
former president Donald J. Trump.
That's exactly right. Trump wearing a baseball for the many shirt? Who says no?
I think we could get it to happen. Although, if we're being quite honest, I don't know that we sell shirts that would just like fit his strangely shaped body.
Well, we need to change our merch provider then.
Okay, all right.
President most likely to wear Tipping Pitches merch. Jimmy Carter? Like living president, most likely. Dead president, FDR, I would say.
I guess. Yeah. I think he'd be like, what do you mean you host a podcast?
We would just tell him it's like fireside chat. This is the fireside chat
That's
of
true.
2024.
That is true. You're right. Okay.
Thank you. I think about these things.
I actually think we could get old Georgie to rock it.
W or HW?
Well, W is dead.
No. HW is dead.
Oh, wait.
Wow, we've been recording for too long. Fuck, I forgot about that. That really came and went. Now I'm remembering it though, because it was like Obama and Clinton came out and they were all like hunky dory with W and Laura, and it was all like, this is real.
Right,
this is
putting aside politics.
Right. This is what decorum is about. This is what Trump took away from us. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were right for what it's worth.
Question for you.
I think it bridged the divide of this country.
Right. I felt more proud to be an American that day. Question for you. If Biden croaks it tomorrow, they put who?
We have to re-record this episode.
They put who? True. They put who up for the nomination?
Jesus. I mean,
don't answer that. Answer it on the Patreon feed. Patreon.com/tippingpitches. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Call our voicemail 785-422-5881. Write us an email, tippingpitchespod@gmail.com. Buy a shirt, tippingpitches.myshopify.com. All that good stuff. You know where to find us. Tipping_pitches on Twitter. We will talk to you on the Patreon feed later this week and right here on the main feed next week, just like we do every Monday. We'll see you then.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alex Rodriguez. Tipping Pitches.
Tipping Pitches.
This is the one that I love the most.
Tipping Pitches.
So we'll see you next week. See ya!